promotional graphic for Goodbye Tiger, Hello Rabbit, Disabled Asian Youth in Conversation. This event is an extension of Tiger Talks, a series of community conversations with writers and creatives to celebrate Alice Wong's new memoir, Year of the Tiger.
Hello, everyone. Let's get started. Welcome to our next event in the Tiger Talk series, which is a collaboration between the Disability Visibility Project, Disability and Intersectionality Summit, and the organization that I'm joining you from, the Longmore Institute on Disability at San Francisco State University. My name is Emily Badix, and I'm the interim director here. I have a few access notes to kick off our program today. If you want more customized captioning, you can visit tinyurl.com/Longmore captions. I'll post that in the chat in just a moment. We're only going to use the chat function today for access and information between panelists, but we invite you to use the Q&A function as if it's a chat room. We'll share that out with attendees later if you want it, if it's not accessible to you during the live program. So feel free to react to our speakers there. Our program's pretty tight today, so we're not sure that we'll be able to answer any questions posed in the Q&A, but we'll definitely share that with our panelists, and perhaps they'll be able to respond later on social media or something. Lastly, we will announce the names of our book winners at the end of the program, so stay tuned for that. And I will just say I've been so pleased to get to run this program to honor Alice Wong's book and all those that she is in community with through this series. And one of the biggest highlights has been getting to work with Sandy Ho. So I will pass the torch to you, Sandy, and thank you so much for all that you've been doing in this collaboration.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Emily, for that introduction. My name is Sandy Ho, and I'm here on behalf of the Disability and Intersectionality Summit, one of the partners of this ongoing Tiger Talk series. My pronouns are she, hers, and I am zooming from the unceded territory of the Wampanoag and Massachusetts tribe. I have a Zoom background that is a graphic cartoon of the rear end of a tiger and a rabbit hopping onto the other side of the screen. And this is a graphic that was illustrated by the exiled political cartoonist named Rebel Pepper. And I will drop Rebel's Twitter into the chat. Actually, sorry, let me do that again. There we go. Okay. And I thought that that would be fitting for this evening's program, aptly titled Goodbye Tiger, Hello Rabbit. So before we get into tonight's conversation, I just want to say a few things about this series. Clearly, we are all here and gathered today because creating, celebrating, and prioritizing community is absolutely at the core of Alice Wong's Disability Visibility platform that so many of us continue to find ourselves in. No one, and really, even as our close friends, no one can and no one should ever speak for Alice. But I will just share that this series has been life-giving for her during some of the most challenging months she's ever had to experience since her stay in the ICU over the summer. She's been, of course, writing about many of these experiences, including highlighting the precarity of Medicaid, the lack of caregiving equity and infrastructure, and the ways that these very systems force many in a disabled community to take care of our own, unfortunately, when we shouldn't have to, by crowdfunding for our own healthcare. So I want to take a moment also to thank the many individuals who have donated to Alice's ongoing GoFundMe. That has been another community-led effort so that she can remain at home and continue to write more books and scheming all kinds of other projects, one of which is called the Society of Disabled Oracles, which is in partnership with Jem White Johnson. and Amy Hammer. And I believe the link to that project will be dropped into the chat as well. Lastly, I want to shout out and thank my co-partner in organizing this series, Emily at Longmore Institute, the many moderators and panelists that we have had in discussion throughout this series, including tonight's panel of disabled writers and advocates that we'll be hearing more from. So that said, I am delighted to turn things over now to tonight's moderator of Goodbye Tiger, Hello Rabbit, Shaina Ghuraya.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for that, Sandy. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I'm really excited to be moderating this panel. And of course, thank you to Alice Wong for inspiring and working to help create this series of events. My name is Shaina, and I am a South Asian woman with long black hair, big black rimmed glasses, and I'm wearing a blue patterned turtleneck, and I have a blurred background. A little about me, I'm a director and screenwriter, and I've written on 2 Netflix animation shows, and I was also a participant of Sundance's All Accessible Futures initiative. But now on to our really talented panelists, Melissa and Shruti. So Melissa, why don't you take it away with your bio?
Sounds great. Thanks so much, Shaina. Hi, everyone. I am Melissa. I'm an Asian woman wearing a white shirt with a red hooded lanyard, and I have black hair tied into a ponytail. And behind me is a tapestry and a brown closet. A little bit about me is that I am a sophomore at Harvard studying psychology, and I was born with Sjogren-Murray tooth disease, a form of muscular dystrophy. So I use a power wheelchair, and I've been doing disability activism since I was 10 years old. And I've, written a book and spoken, and worked with disability rights organizations around the country, and it's an honor to be here. Thanks.
Awesome. Shruti, why don't you take it away?
Sure. My name is Shruti. I am a South Asian femme-presenting person with curly black hair down to my shoulders. I am wearing a blue sweater and a green top, and my background is a purple room with a bed. My dog is on the bed as well. And a little bit about me is I'm a reporter at HuffPost on the breaking news team. I cover breaking news and disability as well, which is my beat. And I also have a podcast. I haven't really mentioned that a lot in the conversations that we had about the event, but I co-host that with one of my good friends, Harper. And I also graduated from college last May from Emerson College with a bachelor's degree in journalism.
Awesome. Okay, Shruti, I'm going to be bugging you for the link to that podcast after this panel. But let's get into things. So I wanted to kick it off by talking about the intersection of being Asian and disabled. So Alice has a chapter titled Lessons from a Chinese School Dropout. And she writes, quote, "I have never been nor will ever be anyone's model minority." That's on page 9 if anyone wants to look it up. So this personally resonated with me. Growing up, I felt like my disabled identity was separate from my South Asian identity. And that because I was disabled, I wasn't held to the same standards and expectations as other family members. And that was really upsetting to me. So I'm a fiery person, and the fact that the family around me didn't think I could succeed really gave me like this chip on my shoulder. And that led me to pushing myself too hard to try to fit into the harmful model minority stereotype. So, with all that being said, my question to you both is, how has the intersection of being disabled and Asian presented itself in your life? So Shruti, why don't you start us off?
Sure. So what's really interesting is I feel like I kind of had the opposite experience to Alice, where I had the same expectations placed on me that my other family members had. I have an older brother, and he had all these expectations placed on him, and I had those same expectations placed on me. even though I was disabled. And I think very early on, I noticed that I couldn't live up to those expectations. And I did push myself to an extent, but after a while, I realized like this just isn't it. I can't keep doing this. And I actually wrote an article about this in college titled I Am Not the Standard and That's Okay. And I recognized that I can't fit myself into a mold that was not designed for me. And in learning about myself and learning who I actually am, I had to kind of break free of that mold and live up to my own standard and define those standards for me. So that's kind of how my Asian and disabled identity kind of came together. And yeah, it was really just about rejecting the abled standard and the abled standard and the South Asian standards that were placed onto me so that I could authentically live as myself.
I love that. Like you had to break out of the mold that wasn't created for you. I love that. Melissa, why don't you take it away?
Yeah. So like as when you mentioned how you felt like your Asian and disabled identities were kind of separate, I felt a similar way growing up. So I'm Chinese American, and back in China, disabled people don't really have like the freedom and liberties and rights that they have here in the US. A lot of like stereotypes and stigma exists around disability. And people with disabilities, oftentimes are just like shunned and stuck in their homes. And so growing up, I feel like I was constantly inundated with things like I hope you get cured soon, or like, when are you going to get better? Or I'm so sorry you have to live this way. And so growing up, it really made me feel like, disability pride and my Asian identity like had to be very much separate because they contradicted so much. But like in recent years, I have really worked to become proud of both my Asian identity and my disabled identity. And like kind of reconcile that and be proud of my intersectionality.
Yeah, no, and that's a lifelong journey, I think, especially for me. Like being proud of my identities, all of them, and also like learning the new ways they intersect. But that's really interesting, Melissa, and I can definitely relate to the, again, harmful stigma of like you have to be cured in order to be okay. And so, okay, so going a little ways into both of your paths, I want to talk about our respective activist backgrounds. I became an activist in undergrad when I didn't have a wheelchair accessible desk to sit at in most of my classes. So I got a camera and secretly filmed the discrimination and then put it up on social media. And the amount of support I got put pressure on administration to really change things for the better, thankfully. But I know the first spark of activism is different for everyone. And so again, I'd love to hear about both of your journeys. So Melissa, why don't we start with you this time?
For sure, yeah. So growing up, I was obsessed with the doll company American Girl. And every year they would have a doll called the Girl of the Year doll, which was, a story about a doll who faced challenges that every like kid with preteen girl often faced. From like issues adjusting to growing up, to like learning how to do gymnastics again after an injury. And so I, despite being so infatuated by these dolls, never felt like there was a doll that was anything like me, because none of them were disabled. And so when I was 10 years old, my sister and I decided to start a petition on change.org for American Girl to release a Girl of the Year doll with a disability. And like initially, we expected it to, a few hundred or a few thousand signatures at most, but instead it ended up going viral and getting almost 150,000 signatures. And I was flooded with support from both other disabled people as well as like non-disabled allies who were like, you helped me better understand and support my disabled friend or neighbor or sibling. And like all of that was just so positive for me. That made me realize that I had a voice and that I needed to use it to, change the world to be more accommodating and accessible towards disabled individuals. And so that's how I like started my activism.
Love that. Love that. Shruti?
Yeah, so for me, technically, mine started when I was 17 years old. Me and my friends went to Universal Studios, and one of my accommodations at theme parks and things like that is to get an accessible pass so that I don't have to wait in the lines. And I ended up going to guest services and asking for the pass, and they straight up denied the pass to me and they wouldn't give it to me. And it was a whole thing trying to get accessibility from that, and it didn't work out. And it made the experience really difficult. But afterwards, I ended up making a Twitter thread about it. And it wasn't that great. It wasn't like a super great thread, but I ended up getting the attention of the CEO of Universal Studios, and my friend's mom, who's a lawyer, also wrote a letter to the president or CEO of the company, and they ended up addressing it and giving us free passes to come back and saying that they would address the policies that were preventing me from having access at the park, which was really great. But then from there, my advocacy also kind of continued when I was in college. When my sophomore year, I was given an inaccessible suite to live in, and it was sort of a mess how that whole thing happened, because I was told that it was accessible, and then 4 days before I moved in, they were like, actually, no, it's not, and you're going to have to buy some of the accommodations for yourself, and we're going to install the other ones, but it's going to take a few weeks, so you're going to have an inaccessible suite for a few weeks. And so I ended up, doing my best to navigate that situation. But then I wrote an article for the school newspaper, which kind of made its way back to student accessibility services. And, they were like, okay, we're going to get on this. We're going to try and do better. And so from there, I ended up connecting with other disabled students. I was a part of the initial start of a disability student organization, and we ended up doing so many campaigns, and I really found my voice there, and also found a way to advocate for other disabled students on campus. And it really helped strengthen my advocacy skills, while also showing me how that can show up in my work in journalism, because advocacy and journalism don't really mix in the industry, but I see it as a powerful tool in the industry. And I think that my experiences in college really helped me with that. And I became better at speaking for myself and also advocating for my community. And I'm glad I brought up like that initial tweet that I made about Universal Studios, because it reminds me of over the summer, the last thing that I had to deal with was I was denied entrance into a bar in DC because of my wheelchair. And I ended up making a tweet and a thread about it. And it was pretty well written, I think. And it actually ended up going viral, and it got a lot of attention. So I just think it was a really kind of full circle moment to show the growth over the past 6 or 7 years for me as an advocate.
Wow. Okay. So what I really appreciate about both your stories is that first spark of making a big change can be something as simple as like starting a petition, putting up a tweet, right? Even writing a letter to your campus. And yeah, so I just really appreciate that. But I wanted to go back, Shruti, to something you said, and then also circle back after that to Melissa. But you mentioned advocacy and journalism don't usually go together. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that whole mindset kind of comes from this idea that journalists need to be neutral, unbiased, and only represent objectivity. And I definitely take issue with that sort of approach, because while at face value, sure, maybe it's not the best thing to say you're both an advocate and a journalist, but I see the skills and the knowledge that advocates have as being very beneficial in journalism and in addressing, a lot of the issues that the industry has. So for me, my advocacy allows me to understand disability identity and to understand the intersection of race and disability, and also know what's wrong with the industry and what's wrong with the coverage of these communities. And I think that I am able to kind of go into newsrooms and present these issues that a lot of people don't really know about, and also like within the community, policy issues that people want covered and things like that. And I can kind of bring that in to journalism and report on that. And to me, that's the advocacy aspect. Advocacy can look like a bunch of different things. It can just be speaking your mind, or it can be doing hands-on work, whether that be in journalism or at a protest. And I think that separating them out isn't that productive. We don't really live single issue lives, and you can't really make anything that you're doing unbiased. It's not possible, especially when you share those identities and you're a part of those communities. So yeah, to me, I think advocacy just really supports my journalism.
That's a really thoughtful response. Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. Melissa, I wanted to circle back with you and just ask if, I know that there were some challenges you had once you wrote the book. And can you just let us know what some of those were and how you overcame them?
For sure, yeah. So I guess a little bit of context. After my petition, American Girl reached out to me, and they were essentially like, "We really appreciate your activism. However, we can't really promise anything." And then like that led me to be so initially frustrated that my, attempt didn't actually work out. But then, my sister and I started thinking, and we were like, well, what really matters to us is the story, the representation of disability in children's media. And so then we thought, like, with American Girls not going to do it for us, then why not write our own children's story, starring a girl with a disability? And so we started a Kickstarter campaign that again ended up raising $6,000, which we are so grateful for. But then like after we started sending it out to publishers, the overwhelming response that we received was, this book is too happy. This book doesn't have enough conflict in it. This book should be sad and should have more conflict, should I guess what they perceived as be more realistic to the disability experience, when in reality, what the focus of our story was to write a happy book, just starring a protagonist with a disability, like so many other children and middle grade novels. It's because that was so frustrating. We didn't want to like lose sight of what the purpose of our book is. So we decided to go the self-publishing route, and the resulting novel, Be Elise Going Through Middle School, was published in 2016.
Really, really great story. No, I relate again to that whole like having to go around the system and make your own way. And I know another activist who mentioned like people with disabilities are the best problem solvers. Again, like everyone should hire us for every job. We're great. Okay, so switching gears a little bit, something that the three of us are really passionate about is the medical model and how it impacts people with disabilities. So Shruti, I know this quote from Alice really resonated with you, and it's quote, "This walking shit ain't it." So doctors have tried so hard to make my body conform to how they think it should look and behave. And I'm 27 years old, but it took me till 23 to realize that if something that the doctors want me to do doesn't make me feel good, just say no. With that being said, what is both of your relationships like with the medical model, and how do you want to see it change in the future? So I'll start with Shruti.
Yeah, so I have so much to say about this, and I could probably talk for hours about it. So I'll try to keep it short, but I definitely relate to what you said about growing up with the medical model. And kind of being forced to fit into this mold and to endure situations that don't feel good for your body. And that's definitely similar to how I was raised. I was in these medical settings being told that my goal is to become non-disabled and to not use mobility aids. And I kind of started to believe this idea that my only purpose in life is to try to be non-disabled, which is really heavy to feel as a kid, because as you grow older and you're not improving the way that they want you to, it can, it cannot feel good. And I think for me, I also had, these medical professionals kind of implying that a lack of improvement was a reflection of a moral failure on my end, as though it was like my fault. And on top of that, the words that were often used to describe my body were like, weak and abnormal and things like that. And it kind of reminded me of a section in Alice's book where I think she was speaking about the same thing, the words that were used to describe her body. And another quote that resonated with me there was her describing this as an attack on her personhood, which I definitely felt as well, because when I was growing up, I always felt that, the way that they were describing my body, I was like, I don't like this. Like, I don't like that it's making me develop a really negative relationship with my body and my self-image and my self-worth. So I kind of had this like very early sense of injustice in these settings. And I was probably seen as very stubborn because I wouldn't do my exercises or my stretches. And then, I would get in trouble for not like improving when it was completely out of my reach and out of my control. And but I felt that, and I held on to that for years, and I'm glad I did, because that kind of leads me to, what I see needs to be changed in the medical model. The first one being, you can't always perceive the full extent of a disability just by looking at it. And by that, what I mean is, I would have doctors look at me and say, oh, this looks uncomfortable. This looks painful for you. So we're going to medically intervene. We're going to do X, Y, and Z. We're going to do all this stuff. You're going to have to go to physical therapy. You're going to have to do all this. And yet they never asked me how I actually felt because it was my body. I've lived in it my entire life and I know it better than anybody else. And I was comfortable in my body. It was the only one I knew. And yet they were telling me, no, that's not okay. And at the end of the day, it was about aesthetics. A lot of it was about aesthetics, wanting to fit you into this non-disabled mold. So I would say, to fix the medical model, we need to center disabled voices in the care and treatment that they're getting, and also center their goals, because goals aren't subjective and they're different for everybody. My goal was not to become non-disabled, but that was the one that was placed on me. And I would have enjoyed or maybe not enjoyed, but I would have respected the interactions that I had in these medical settings had they actually centered what I wanted. And then the last thing I'll say is I think also people within the medical model need to challenge this mindset and this implicit bias and automatic assumption that less disability, and in my case, more mobility, equals higher quality of life and happiness. Because honestly, that might be the case for some disabled people, but for me, I feel like my life didn't start until I started rejecting the medical model and drawing boundaries in those spaces, and also just leaning into community and, opportunities that help me find my purpose with my people and with my community. Because at the end of the day, I enjoyed life so much more when I was just letting my body exist the way it's supposed to be.
No, it's really, that was a personal story. So thank you for sharing. But, I've been dealing with chronic pain in my feet. And so it's just easier for me to not wear shoes. But then I would panic and I'd be like, I have to wear shoes. And the doctors were like, we have to get you better so you can wear shoes. And then I'm like, wait, why do I need to? Why actually do I need to? I'm in a power wheelchair. My feet aren't going to get hurt by walking on the ground. It's okay. So again, it's centering what our body needs and not what people think we should have. Melissa.
Yeah. So Shruti and so many other people, I think that as disabled people, we so often have the medical model and the emphasis on cure and treatment placed upon us. Like growing up, like not only did my relatives constantly suggest that my life was worth less because there wasn't a cure for my condition, but also, like medical professionals and doctors and physical therapists would so often suggest like exhausting and painful interventions in an attempt to get me to walk or have more mobility, even though it wasn't what I wanted, which I think is like so messed up. And so I think that to challenge the medical model, one of like the biggest things is, as Shruti mentioned, just to center disabled people and what they and their bodies want, but also to like as a society focus more on the social model, which very much like emphasizes adapting society to be more inclusive and accommodating towards the needs of disabled people, instead of pushing disabled people to feel as if their lives have less value because they're disabled. And because I think that latter model is what causes so much like shame and inaccessibility in society. And so I think that needs to be adopted for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I love how you brought in the community aspect of it, right? All of us working to help each other and adapt. And it also brings up, the whole thing of universal design and how it benefits everyone. I remember at my brother's wedding, there was no ramp to the stage and we were in India. And so they built one. They built one in like, 20 minutes flat. But then everybody ended up using the ramp because it was just easier for them. So I think about that experience a lot. So this next question is really similar, but it's a change of scenery. So we've all been through the college education system. And Melissa, you're currently going through it. So I know for me, for grad school, I had to decide between two really great colleges, and I thought it would be a difficult decision. But when people at one of the colleges told me that a classroom wasn't accessible and that in general accessibility was a challenge in their building, I kind of had the decision made for me. I chose a more accessible choice because college is hard enough as is without having to worry about getting into a building every day. So with that being said, Shruti, I know you already touched upon this, but for both of you, what are some gaps in the education system that you both have either experienced or been aware of that you want to see bridged? So Melissa, we'll start with you.
Amazing. Gosh, where do I even start? So I think that like everyone thinks that because Harvard gets so many endowments every year that they must have like ultimate accessibility for disabled students, which is very much not the case. I think like the first thing that I wanted to touch upon was that Harvard currently has no COVID prevention protocol or virtual class options. So high-risk students essentially have to either work with the professors individually, or they had to like risk their lives to go to class and go about their day-to-day lives because the school is not giving us the precautions that we need to keep ourselves safe. I think the second thing is that our accommodations office, what's known as the Disability Access Office, is extremely understaffed with the last time I checked, like 5 or 6 staff members serving over 1,000 students. So most students are not getting their needs met. And another thing is that only 2 out of 12 of the freshman dorms are accessible. And so like if you're a freshman, and you went to like visit your friends, basically they have to come to you. And I think the last thing that's really like stood out to me was that Harvard's fire safety plan is just to shelter in place. And we have attempted to get them to change the plan, and their response was like, this was the plan decided upon by the Cambridge Fire Department. Do not insult their wisdom, which is such a terrible response to disabled students essentially saying, we don't want to stay in place and potentially risk their lives in a fire. So I think that those are like four of the most like prominent cases of inaccessibility and like ableism that I've seen, but I could go on and on, honestly.
Fire drills were the bane of my existence growing up, like elementary through college. It just never gets better. Okay, Shruti.
Yeah, so honestly, a lot of the things that I think of are also the same as what Melissa brought up when I think about my alma mater, Emerson College. Definitely the COVID protocols. I kind of made it out of there just in time, but based on what I've heard, there are still not enough COVID safety measures, and it's really falling on disabled students to fight against a system that is not willing to protect them. And I think that's really sad and not okay, especially since we are in a mass disabling event. So that's definitely a really big one. And then same with the emergency evacuation drills. Emerson also has a kind of stay in place policy. And the other issue is, it definitely leans on using the college police department to support students in the event of an emergency or a fire. And that was something that the student disability organization that I was a part of was trying to advocate against, in conjunction with the work that students of color were doing at the school, trying to dismantle the police department on the college campus. So that was something that we were trying to work on together, because disabled students, especially disabled students of color, should not have to rely on the police department for basic safety measures in the event of an emergency. And again, echoing that sentiment of having an understaffed student disability services office, ours was also very understaffed, very underfunded, and they needed more resources. I think I heard that like one of the people had about like 200 plus cases to have to handle, which is too much for one person. And there's going to be errors and, things falling through the cracks. So definitely that. And then I think the last one is not really in the sense of like, barriers and accessibility, but I wish that colleges had more of a sense of disability consciousness, so that all of the advocacy and all of the improvements don't have to fall on the shoulders of disabled students, because that's usually what happens. Especially in my college, it was very advocacy centered, at least like the spaces that I was in. And it was often the people with multiple marginalized identities, the people who were carrying the weight of systemic injustice constantly, who were really spearheading a lot of the initiatives that did change the college for the better, but that should have been in place way before them.
Yeah, it's really frustrating how the burden of our accessibility and safety almost always falls to us, when that shouldn't be the case, because there are protocols set up for non-disabled people. Yeah. So, okay, we've covered a lot of heavy topics. I want to pose a very fun question to you both. So what's a passion project of yours that you want to be able to complete in your lifetime? And this can be related to disability, but it doesn't have to be. So with that, Shruti.
Yeah, I feel like something that I've always wanted to do is write a book. Like, I really want to write, like, I mean, after reading Alice's book and reading so many other amazing activist books, I feel like all of these topics are things that I'm so passionate about, and I want to put it out into the universe. Like, in all the things that we were just talking about with the medical model, I remember when I was younger, I would always think like, I'm going through this for a reason, which is like so cliche, but I remember being like, there's going to be some payoff in the future. And like, whenever I read these books, I think about that. And I really want to just kind of like sit down and just write about like both the not so great stuff, but then also like the really beautiful moments of disability and just like all the growth that I've done in the past few years and will continue to do, hopefully in the future.
Love that. Love that. It also, Alice's book also inspired me. I really want to write my own too. I just need to like actually sit down and do the work. Melissa?
Yeah. For me, I think that if I ever did get the time to, I would love to create like some sort of social media platform for disabled youth and young adults to be able to communicate with each other. Just because I think that growing up disabled can be such an isolating experience, especially like when you don't see other disabled people around you. Like so often it can feel like you're the only one, like you're the outlier, we're the only one going through the things that you are. And so I would love for youth to have like a space for them to connect with each other. But like at the moment, I haven't really thought this through very much yet, but I would love to get it done sometime in my lifetime if possible.
Awesome. Okay, so now I have some specific questions for you both, but we'll start with Shruti. So in your field of journalism, there's a lot of talk about AI, and some companies have even started having AI write articles, which is, that's made the news in the last couple of weeks. So what are some problems that you see arising from this, and how do you hope things will change?
Yeah. So I'm going to focus on the part of like AI writing articles and like publishing articles, because that's the part that scares me the most, because I feel like that's where ethics and emotions and everything that we're trying to correct in journalism is just going to like go out the window, because AI cannot approach an article in a respectful way about a sensitive topic. And we're trying to diversify our newsrooms. We're trying to bring in journalists who are from different marginalized communities, who know those communities better than anybody else, so that they can approach these stories with sensitivity and emotion, because we're trying to bring in the human aspect to a lot of really heavy things that are happening in the world. And I don't think that AI can do that. And what's really scary is that this is happening alongside a lot of layoffs that are happening in newsrooms. I've seen so many happen just this year, and it's going to impact marginalized communities the most, marginalized reporters the most. And it's already hard enough to get into the field. It's hard enough to do anything in the field and to work your way up when you have these marginalized identities. And I worry that this is going to really target those people and do a disservice to journalism as a whole, right? And I also think that if AI does sort of take over, I think in a way it's kind of reverting back to the origins of journalism in a way. What I was taught was that, journalism kind of started to kind of be a voice to the public, about, what's going on with the people in power. And a lot of people centered this idea of objectivity and wanting to omit bias and just present the facts as is. And then as we started to go along, it started to be more analysis. And then it kind of took over to be, okay, we need to be objective. And if you are biased, then that's a bad thing. And if you go one way, it's a bad thing. If you go the other, it's a bad thing. And a lot of reporters of color, a lot of disabled reporters are challenging that and saying, okay, objectivity maybe isn't the best approach, but truthful storytelling is. And that's where the emotion comes in that AI can't contribute. So I worry that we're going to revert back to that goal of traditional objective journalism when we've made so much progress and we have so much more to go.
Yeah, your take on this is really important. And just putting it out there, maybe a TED Talk is in your future. Who knows? Melissa, so I have a specific question for you. So you're in college right now. At one point, I switched my major like 4 times in undergrad. It was a lot. I was a mess. But I want to talk about you and your future career aspirations, and what are some of the things you want to take into that career in terms of like activism?
Yeah, thanks for your question. First of all, I just recently switched my major from sociology to psychology, so I totally relate with you. I feel like college is like such a time for like figuring things out. That's for my future career aspirations. I could see it going in 2 directions. Like first of all, I think that I might be interested in being a disability rights lawyer, and enforcing the legal rights of disabled people. But also alternatively, I've recently become, like, after witnessing my own experience and my friends' experiences, become a lot more interested in the intersection of disability and the mental health system, and the like amount of like inequities that exist in the mental health system for disabled people. And so like I'm thinking that I also might want to go into the mental health field as a psychologist, just to like bridge that gap. But like honestly, I'm not totally sure which direction I'm going to go in yet. I'm going to do some like exploration in the next few months. But it's one of those two, I think, for now.
Awesome. Again, like, both great opportunities to do a TED Talk. So this is our last question for you both. So activism work can be really tiring and draining, as we know. And I personally find myself needing to escape the real world by playing video games and immersing myself in storytelling, just so I can literally be in a different place. So with that being said, what do you do to recharge your energy to keep fighting the good fight? What are some of your self-care tips? Melissa, let's go with you.
Oh gosh, okay. I mean, first of all, I totally feel you in the sense that like activism can get exhausting. I think that like one of my self-care tips is giving myself time to socialize and spend time with friends and like loved ones who cheer me up and are able to encourage me and empower me. I also love, giving myself time to read books and watch TV shows and media. And lastly, I myself always make sure to get enough sleep, just because I think that it's super important for like staying energized, and avoiding like exhaustion and burnout. So that's just kind of it for me.
No, burnout is really difficult, and there need to be more resources in general on that. Shruti.
Yeah, so similar to Melissa, definitely socializing. I noticed that leaning into community and really just talking with my friends for hours does so much for my mental health and definitely helps me feel grounded and also validated in whatever I'm going through in advocacy or disability, anything. So definitely that. And also, watching TV, playing with my dog who is upside down now on my bed. Sorry about that. And yeah, just doing anything I can to just kind of ground myself. Honestly, like weed helps a lot for me. So, just kind of doing things that can help me just escape for a moment and feel grounded.
Nice. So we have a couple minutes, so we're going to answer an audience question. So for you, Melissa, the question is, what motivated the switch from sociology to psychology? And then Shruti, for you, just briefly, what made you go into journalism? So again, we'll just give brief answers for both. Thanks. Melissa?
Yeah. So honestly, I've always been really interested in psychology as more of like a side interest. But I also like volunteered at a suicide hotline back in high school, and it was a really rewarding and fulfilling experience for me. But I don't think that I started. But I think that like what my focus was always to like bridge the gaps for disabled people in systemic change. And I think that for a while I thought that going into like social justice and the law was the only way for me to do that. Hence why I was doing sociology. But then like recently, after taking a psychology class that I was really interested in, as well as like witnessing some of the like really awful experiences that me and my friends have had to go through in navigating the mental health system, it's really made me realize that like systemic inequities and disparities do exist in mental health as well. And so like going into the mental health system like doesn't means that also still means that I'm able to like bridge a gap and like reform a system. And so that's kind of like what my motivation was.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I've been doing a deep dive into like the intersection of like mental health treatment and disability. And again, it's a lot. So I'm glad you're really interested in that field. Shruti, on to you.
Yeah, so I really loved to write growing up, but I didn't really know that I wanted to go into journalism until maybe around 2016, around the time of the 2016 elections. There was a lot of focus on the media and critiques of the media as well. And I I was kind of focusing a lot on it, and I didn't really know if I wanted to go into political journalism. I think for a moment I wanted to, and then I realized how heavy it was, and I was like, actually no. But I really got into like travel journalism and writing about like accessibility within it. That didn't end up like sticking for me, but I do enjoy that kind of writing. But yeah, it kind of went from there where I just like really enjoyed writing about people in my community. And it started off with like living arts sort of things on my college campus, you know, reporting on musicians of color on campus and, you know, student of color organizations and things like that, and just really amplifying the work that they're doing in a predominantly white institution. And then from there, because it overlapped with the advocacy that I was doing, I realized that I wanted to focus on the intersection of race and disability. And then from junior year onwards, I was really just focused on writing about disability and finding the stories out there that are not being amplified enough and writing about that.
Awesome. Thank you. I always get the really annoying question from some family members of like, why do all your scripts have to be about disability or have a character with a disability? And it's so annoying because, again, it's like, if I don't do it, there's not many people who do in the industry. And also it's my passion, right? My lived experience was never seen on screen, so I want to help bring it to the screen. And I'm really just appreciative of all the work you both are doing in your respective fields, Melissa, in your future respective field. And just can't wait to see what you both create in the future. So with that, are we good to hand it off to Sandy? Awesome. Sandy, on to you.
Hello, and I am going to wait for Emily Schweiz to announce the book giveaways. Here we go. Okay. So the winners of the book giveaways are Bianca S., Eileen Cran, Jacqueline Sanchez, Jay Williams, Leslie Pethud, Lily Williamson, Morgan Nieto, Sophia Morgan, and the Disability Ally NYC, aka Kristen, and Z Zatinko. And in the chat is the link to enter your information, including the format of the book that you would prefer. I just want to wrap us up. And again, a shout out to Shaina, Shruti, and Melissa. Thank you so much for that conversation. We covered so much ground. And I'm really excited, and I think that reflecting on what are the opportunities for media reflection, for storytelling and narratives that are written by and for disabled people has shifted so much. And I think the conversation that we just heard indicated so much of that progress. And of course, Alice, the platform and disability visibility and this book allowed so much of that to happen. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us in this conversation. And again, don't forget to include your information in that link in the chat if you did. Have your name read out loud for a book giveaway. But with that being said, on behalf of the Longboard Institute, the Disability Visibility Project, and the Disability and Intersectionality Summit, thank you everyone and good night.